All right, what's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to Around the VLA. It is season 3, episode 4. My name's Rob St. Clair, live from Chicago. That is Vince Sanzuki, live from Phoenix, Arizona. And this is a special late night edition. We are scrambling. Vince, in addition to the many hats he wears for the VLA, is also the head coach at Park University in Arizona. He just got back from a match. We're going to try and cram in a show in between the first and second of 5 consecutive VLA weekends. And it is only right that we jump on to recap the West Division Cup and to preview the East Division's Tier 1 regular season kicking off this weekend. So, Vince, welcome. Thank you for cramming in some time, my friend.
Yeah, happy to be here.
All right. So if anybody happens to be watching live, great. Put your questions in the YouTube live chat, or if you're catching up on this tomorrow or the next couple days, great. Put your comments in after the video, and we can answer them or whatever. But yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. It is late Wednesday night, but hopefully people catch up on a little bit of info from these two tournaments. So, Vince, you want to start with the West Division Cup, where we just were in San Diego a couple days ago?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's a lot of storylines there, so let's dive right into them.
Yes, there were. And the biggest one is for the first time in VLA history, a Tier 1 team wins a VLA Cup Series tournament, going all the way back to 2021. That VLA Cup was won by SoCal Ruckus. Last year, 4 Cup Series tournaments, 2 won by Ruckus, one by Emiola, one won by Eastside Cleveland, rebranded to the Cleveland Kong, who sent me this awesome hoodie. So shout outs to our boy Todd Coughlin for the new Cleveland novice gear. But after 5 tournaments in the books in the VLA Cup Series, none of them won by a Tier 1 team until now. The SoCal Rising Tide gets on the board. They complete a perfect season debut at 5-0. They beat Team NV, who is basically the next chapter of SoCal Ruckus in the final, pretty convincingly 3-0. And the Rising Tide are the team to beat in the West right now. Vince, let's talk about the finals and talk about the Rising Tide before we break in the rest of the tournament.
Yeah, I thought Rising Tide was very convincing this weekend, and I think that we kind of knew based off of their roster that they would be. I mean, with really, really good pickups. Obviously, Madden Hayden being one of Madison Hayden being one of the big ones, but I mean, just the depth that they had in their lineup. But a lot of the usual suspects, obviously, Chris Johnson being there, Rob Millay, and they just really, really played sound throughout. They were, other than the 5-setter, I think that they went with Emiola in day one,
There's first thing day 2,
first
yeah, in that
two.
quarterfinal.
I think that they just kind of flowed through. I think that they only dropped those 2 sets the entire weekend, so almost going perfect for the whole tournament. They did end up having only getting those 2 points, but in the Emiola match, going 14 points instead of 15 points for the duration, but pretty much as flawless as you can get in a cup event. And they looked really, really good. You can tell that they've been playing a lot together, and when in Southern California, they're definitely the team to beat. So, huge congrats to them for being the first Tier 1 team to finally win a Division Cup. And it's gonna be interesting to see how they play the rest of the season after this.
Yeah, it is, and we'll see them in about a week and a half now in Phoenix for the first regular season Tier 1 event in the West Division. I'm fascinated to see how they follow it up there. But the thing that I was most impressed with about the Rising Tide, obviously the talent, of course, like Joel Schneidmiller, Austin Matautia, Madison Hayden rotating in an outside hitter, and then John Predney winning the tournament for them at opposite, which was really impressive. But more importantly was the way that they managed their roster throughout the tournament. We talk about this all the time in the VLA Cup Series events. It's a lot of matches. You've got to have depth. You've got to manage them well. And there were some other teams that played extremely well and like had peaks this weekend that were at or near the level of the Rising Tide, but they would stumble randomly here and there, or their level would drop when they put guys in off the bench. And the Rising Tide just didn't have that. I mean, Madison Hayden didn't see the court in the finals. He was all tournament at this event a season ago. He's one of the best outside hitters in the league. And because of the depth that they have, they could use Madison Hayden to get them to the final. And then in the final, they actually didn't even end up needing him, which is crazy to think about. But because of their ability to play with their roster like that, to have way more than a starting lineup of sevens worth of guys that are really, really good, and the way that they use them to get to the final and still be playing great ball in the final was super impressive. And I think kind of wrote a blueprint for the rest of the league to follow on the way you have to manage your team to win an event like that.
Yeah, it's something that has consistently been done with Ruckus now, Team Envy, but with Ruckus previous years, where they did have guys that could come in and kind of fill that role. I think that their depth definitely hindered them a little bit, having to really, get through Ascension with relatively a full starting lineup, other than Wexter, who had to come in late in the match to kind of finish it off. They really need to find that a little bit more depth in their own roster, which I'm sure they will down the road. Looking at the future cups that they're going to play in, but I think that yeah, exactly. We kind of understood what the blueprint was. It's whether or not those guys that come and their third or fourth outside hitters can really do the job to make sure that you're not stumbling in the semifinals and you're fresh for the finals. So obviously. Rising Tide definitely did that. They did a great job of making sure that none of their matches really went long the day before. They took care of business against Emiola, and then finally getting to that final match was key. They were fresh. They looked really, really ready to go, and they were a solid team.
Absolutely. And we got to talk about the bracket that they had as we take a look. All this is up to date on the website, by the way, so go ahead and check it out if you want any more detail on the matches. I think the real thing that got the Rising Tide to the final and able to play their best volleyball once they got there is a relatively easy semifinal match. I mean, they had the Phoenix Valor, who pulled the upset of the tournament by far, beating the Bay Area Dimes in 5 in the quarterfinals. And I think once Valor had to really spend everything they had to win that match, by the time they played the Rising Tide again, who they also played in pools the day before, they had totally run out of gas. And those set scores, let's look at it. They were not close at all. Semifinals, yeah, 17, 18, 11. So the Rising Tide relatively had an extremely easy time in the semifinal compared to what Team NV had against Vince and the Phoenix Ascension, who I thought looked really good this weekend. Had to play most of the starters, win a 4-setter there after having to play a lot of the starters to win a 4-setter against the San Diego Wave in the morning. Team NV just had to play more volleyball and had a harder path to get to the final. And by the time that they did, it was difficult for them to keep their level as high as we had seen it throughout the event. So it definitely would have been a bit of a different story, I think, if the Rising Tide had to play the Bay Area Dimes in the semifinals. But that's the way the bracket goes. I mean, the Rising Tide managed their roster extremely well. They took advantage of maybe a good break, and the Dimes, who I thought after day one beating Team NV in pools, I thought they had a chance to win the tournament, but they didn't really manage their lineup all that well, keeping the bench in for too long until it was too late in that 5-setter against Valor in the quarterfinals. And that's the thing. That's the learning curve of these tournaments.
Yeah, exactly. And you talk about exactly like you said, Team Envy ended up losing to Dimes, which gave them a much tougher path. I mean, really,
Right.
had Team Envy won their pool instead of Dimes, they would have played Valor. They would have seen Rising Tide in the semis instead of us. But at the same time, that extra, that extra match that running into running into us, but then running into Wave. Early, that is a lot of high intensity volleyball to try to play in that amount, in one day. So, yeah, I mean, had they performed better the first day, they wouldn't have maybe ran into the same issues. But at the same time, they got through it. They got to the finals, and they still had a relatively successful tournament. Just probably not successful to them in their standard of having won this tournament last year. But it really did seem like it was kind of Rising Tide's weekend and time to kind of take the reins on this event.
Yeah, and the finals was a 3-0, but it was extremely competitive. I think 23, 21, 23 were the set scores. Like really, really tight, really, really good high level volleyball. Just the Rising Tide made a couple late plays, and they were clearly the deserving team, and it was cool to talk to them on the broadcast after that match was over, after they had the trophy in hand. Let's see their trophy picture again. The boys are looking awfully good there. Uh, because they know a team like Team NV so well. So many of those guys play against each other all the time in open gyms, whatever. They played with against each other in college. The familiarity is there, and it was basically a rematch of last year's final, and it was just those couple plays late. Vince, I wanted to ask you, as a former teammate of a certain Joe Kaliakamoa, who is unbelievable and well deserved not on the all tournament teams. We can take a look at that. Do you think that he's attacking the ball too much? Because I think that teams really figured out his aggressive nature and defended against him extremely well throughout that tournament, including the Rising Tide in the final.
I think it's no secret anymore that he does attack at the net often, and I know that he works really hard with Mark Olson and some of those guys on being deceptive and trying to pull blockers and things like that with his attack movements before setting a back one or something. It's just, I guess, more the timing of when I felt like he was attacking the ball. Against Rising Tide, and to some extent against Ascension too. I felt like it was not as timely. It was a little bit more expected than usual, which meant the teams were able to defend it a little bit better. Typically, I mean, you'd see him get 5, 6, maybe even 8 kills in a match where he's just super aggressive at the net and making sure that he controls it up there, because sometimes it's impossible to stop even if you do see it. But at the same time, I don't feel like he had the same success. But it also comes with the other attackers being successful. I mean, it's easy for him to score a point when you got an outside hitter or a right side that's just dominating. I don't feel like the pins dominated. The middles definitely didn't dominate like they usually do. And so I think that it became more of a necessity in the matches for him to try to score points instead of an extra weapon. And so I think that kind of says a little bit more about how Rising Tide was playing the rest of the team, not necessarily just how they were approaching Joe's offense. But yeah, I mean, I think that's something that he'll figure out as as the season goes on. He's pretty resilient, if I know him as well as I think I do.
That's
And
for sure.
he's going to capitalize on those things eventually. I mean, he's still the most dangerous setter to play against. So, I don't think that it necessarily was his attacking that lost the match by any means, but I think that it was more one of those things where nothing seemed to be working as efficiently as he probably would have liked, and so he kind of used it as a last resort instead of using it as just kind of a tool to broaden the offense.
I think that's really well said. And to bridge that to the all tournament team, Joe Kaliakamoa, well deserved nod at the setter position. Fellow NV teammates, Michael Wexter at opposite, I thought was awesome. And Garrett Como at libero is an absolute no brainer. He's just such a treat to watch. It is really exciting to be able to give the MVP of this tournament to a middle blocker. I love shouting out middles. Hunter Howell really commanded the front court every time he played for the Rising Tide. And so did Chris Johnson, but KJ didn't show up until Sunday morning. He didn't play any of the matches on Saturday because he was coaching up in up near LA. So Howell and Taylor Falduti as well, all three middle blockers for the Rising Tide, I thought played awesome. Howell read the game really well, got great block touches, was almost perfect on offense, and legitimately was a force. And it's rare that you have a middle that has that much impact on a game or on a tournament. But well-deserved MVP for Hunter Howell, I thought. And then both Rising Tide starting outside hitters in the finals. Austin Matautia out of UCLA, Joel Schneidmiller out of UC Irvine. There was a ball that Joel there was a play that Joel made late in the third set that kind of sucked any momentum out of a Team Envy comeback. It was in rotation one. He passed the ball in position one on the right side, kind of to his inside, then got out to attack on the right side and bounced the ball straight down the line. it was as electric of like a first and third contact play as I saw all weekend, and I was very impressed by that. So, well deserved all tournament nod for both Rising Tide outsides. And then the middles, Vince's teammate Jonathan Bishop, an absolute rising star in the middle position for the Ascension. I love his attacking range. I love his blocking game. And then who's kind of a middle blocker, but also more of a bit of a utility player, is a guy that Vince knows pretty well from the Phoenix area, Taylor Galliano from the Valor. Vince, can you explain to us like what Valor exactly was doing with Taylor, like how they were using him in all those different ways?
I you know I think if Dimes couldn't figure it out, I'm not going to have a whole lot of luck figuring it out. You
They
know,
lined him up at like all three different positions. It was
yeah,
crazy.
he's. I mean, he played middle at GCU in college. I mean, he's he really likes to play on the pins. I mean, he's just a natural athlete, very very good volleyball player, and I mean, he was just everywhere this weekend for Valor, particularly in that Dimes match, which was really a defining match for them. Really, I think gives Valor a lot of credibility about the talent level that they have within that group and how hard they work in practice. Taylor's just a dynamic guy who doesn't always necessarily play the most conventional of volleyball. And I think that makes him really difficult to play against. And there's a lot of players out there that are unconventional, but there's not a whole lot that can be that effective against that good of a team. And I mean, there was times where I saw him running, like back, like he would come in and run like a front one from the right side while they had a middle running a three. And then, what I mean? It's just he did a lot of different things that were abstract with just, I mean, that little bit of confusion to the other side of the net made it just wide open for the 31 to attack. So,
Yeah, they
I
were
mean,
running triple quick at different points. Like I think Taylor was lined up as an outside hitter at one point. He was like passing on the right side in rotation one, but then shifted over, ran a front quick with a 31 and a shoot ball to the outside, like over the top of it. It was one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. Got to shout out Phoenix setter Kai Heaton as well to facilitate all that nonsense. Was pretty cool to watch a team pull off an offense that weird. And I mean, other than the final where Rising Tide, I mean, that was the defining match of the tournament, obviously Rising Tide winning. But second to that was Valor beating the Bay Area Dimes in the quarterfinal in that five-setter. That was the upset of the year so far in the VLA. So huge credit to Taylor and the whole Valor team from in less than a year of existence, just playing a little bit in the offseason. Tied third at this event is pretty darn impressive.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can't, not credit everyone in that on that team for doing what they did. And and they definitely came and played big in that match, and that was again, like you said, probably the second most defining match of the tournament was right there.
I think it definitely was. Let's quickly talk about some other notable bracket matches. We talked about the final. There were some consolation matches that were played that were actually really good. I mean, Lost Travelers beating Riptide 17-15 in the fifth is obviously a great match. We talked about the semis both a little bit, even Vince, your team, but I mean, all four quarterfinals were really good. I had a great time covering this on VLA all day, our like whip around broadcast that covered all four courts. Cause I mean, you can see these two four setters, two five setters, all of them were kind of synced up in time. So all the sets were ending at about the same time. And I was just flipping back and forth, like catching set point here, set point there. It was really, really fun to follow along with all that. I was really impressed by the Dallas Dogs in their VLA debut. I know that Vince, you guys, after getting kind of smoked in set one, rebounded really well to beat him in four. But Dallas then won a consolation match against Emiola and I think finished solo fifth. They were really impressive. We talked about the Bay Area Dimes kind of disappointment in the quarterfinal already, and San Diego Wave making their VLA debut undefeated on day one. I thought that was pretty impressive too.
Yeah, absolutely. And backtracking a little bit on what you were saying about the how synced up all those first matches were. It was really kind of a neat thing. At one point, there was not a single match going on because every single set two
Was in a
match
set break.
ended almost. Yeah, and it was like, wow, we're about to start set three. Every single match here is at the exact same time, and so I thought that was kind of a unique little experience right there. But yeah, I mean, again, Dogs had a really really solid team, and we kind of expected them to. Just based off of their origins and whatnot, they're very actually a pretty experienced team, and they came out and handled business. I mean, they first match they came in uh, as the 4 seed in their pool, beat Emiola, and then had a battle with Wave. Come in, win their match against Buddy Bears, and then they follow that up with playing us pretty tough. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't think that we were in too much trouble when we lost the first one, just based off of how we were playing. I knew we'd respond pretty well. I I like to say how you get that team that blows another team out, and the other team brings down their guard a little bit. I think that the Dogs actually, the first time I was ever on the beneficiary side of that, where the other team lightens up a little bit and we play a little bit better. But I think that once we kind of got in a rhythm, we were pretty sound after that point. But the Dogs beating Emiola twice is a huge thing. For them getting the points that they got 8 points in one tournament, and considering they're in the West Division, that's a pretty big factor. Considering that them, Wave, and Brigade, I mean, they're really kind of almost neck and neck at this point if you look at it. So, it's one of those things that makes that race a little bit interesting. So there's a lot of tier 2 implications on that as far as who's possibly earning that next promotion into the West Division.
Definitely. We'll take a look at the standings here in a minute. But yeah, I mean, we don't have all the time in the world to dig into every match and how every team performed. But I mean, just overall, this was a fantastic tournament. Really, really good tournament. Huge thanks to San Diego Wave for hosting us. Great facility. It was a unique facility because of the way that the walls and the ceilings were. There was actually kind of like a game plan adjustment that some teams made in digging balls, and that I talked about a little on the broadcast in the final. That was kind of cool. I got to give a shout out to Axio Training as well for sponsoring the all tournament team. It was cool to give all the guys one of the Axio centripetal training products and get them seeing them using it, making this motion with the circle thing before the finals and all that. That was cool. And just the great volleyball from all the teams, 14 teams, and a really good broadcast all the way around. I think this tournament was a huge success.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I like I get really excited about is that every single team walked away with at least a point.
Right. I love that.
And it's one of those things where you hate to see a team come in, go 0-4, go home empty-handed. And a few teams did go 0-4, but at the same time, we're able to put up a good fight, showing that they belong. And so I mean, it was a solid all-around tournament. 14 great teams. Obviously, one stood out above all the rest with Rising Tide, but I mean, that's why we play the tournaments. That's why we play the matches. You just, as Valor proved, you can't just say this team's going to win. You got to go out and do it. So
that's right.
It was a great event.
So here's a look at the Tier 2 West Division standings. You've got the 2023 points, like for the points for this season only, on the left column, and then the cumulative points and cup wins in black on the right column. I mean, this is tight. If we can assume that Emiola and Ruckus aren't interested in accepting a bid to Tier 1, it's going to come down, like you said, Brigade, Dimes, Wave, Dallas Dogs, even Phoenix Valor, like so many of these teams, even through one event, are really tight in the cumulative standings. And some of these teams potentially get into the Tier 2 championship. That's going to be really tight as well. It's going to be about who can play the most tournaments, I would think. So it was cool to see everybody go in there and at least get a point. Even Riptide, who didn't win a match, had a couple 5-setters, or just the one 5-setter that they got points from. Really cool to see how competitive that tournament was top to bottom. The Utah Outlaws had a good debut. Wave and Dimes, obviously good debuts. Brigade, not as good as we were maybe hoping out of them, but they did grab some points in the consolation matches. Just really, really competitive. So everyone check out the standings on the website if you're interested. Yeah, we had Lost Travelers get points in the East Division coming out of there. We had the 630 Buddy Bears get points in the Central Division, trying to keep pace with Milwaukee Dive. And then let's look at Tier 1 overall. Yeah, Tier 1 overall with the Rising Tide going 5-0 the way that they did. I mean, that one cup win is basically going to guarantee that they make the playoffs, even after one event. But they very likely will go in as the number 1 seed. Almost perfect points per matches played right now.
Yep, absolutely. And I mean, that is a pretty big factor, especially with Rising Tide. How they do have variations in their roster as they travel into certain different events, and so, but to their extent, I mean, it helps them because last year they definitely had to. Um, they were at the bottom for the final West Division event, and they had to kind of win out to even make the playoffs. And so this puts them in a position where they're really not going to have to struggle that much. Or put a whole lot of emphasis on some of the events like they would have if they didn't win that tournament. So obviously it's that comfort of being able to take care of business on your home floor. And I think that they did a good job, and we'll see how they treat the rest of the season, considering they do have that win.
Right, and it won't take long until we start to figure that out because, like I said, after this weekend, next weekend we will see them back in action with them, the Ascension and Vince's guys, and the West Coast Brigade heading to Phoenix to play some Tier 1 regular season ball. So we'll certainly talk about that event next week. But as we look at this standings, Vince, only 3 teams left to make their season debuts. And is it time to talk about the East?
Yep, let's go.
Let's do it. So the East Division is the last to get kicked off on the season, and we're heading back this weekend to the East Coast, back to the Mohegan Sun Casino in Connecticut, same place where we were last year to kick off the East Division regular season. Team LVC out of New York, the Boston Bounce, and the Northeast Force, who are our hosts for the weekend, playing 6 matches total in Connecticut, and I'm very excited to be there. I'm flying out on Friday, 3 days worth of volleyball. Match Friday night, 8 p.m. Eastern, 3 matches Saturday afternoon into evening, and then 2 on Sunday before. Vince, I hear there might be a certain other sporting event going on in Phoenix, in the Phoenix area on Sunday that we don't want to interfere with. So we're going to get you get those matches done on Sunday and get out of the way.
Yeah, no, I couldn't tell you what that is. Nothing's more important than the VLA.
You nailed it. So, Team LVC, the reigning champs, making their season debut. Boston Bounce, the only team not in the founding 5 to make the playoffs last year, and the Northeast Force, who unfortunately for them finished dead last in the Tier 1 standings last year, all making their debuts this weekend, all trying to get the season off on the right foot. And a lot going into this one, Vince. First, a huge relief for the rest of the teams in the league who are not named Team LVC. First team all VLA middle blocker Blake Leeson has sort of at the last minute taken a professional contract in Sweden. He's gone over there overseas. He'll play the last 6 or 8 weeks of the European season. And because of that, we thought that he was going to play for LVC the entire year. Not the case. He'll miss this event and he'll miss the event in Boston at the end of February. And that is a huge break for the other 2 teams in this division.
Yeah, I mean Blake Leeson, definitely the pinnacle of middle blockers in the United States, really. Fortunate for Bounce and Force, I mean, I guess it gives them a chance, but yeah, nothing to take away from what LVC is going to do. They're going to have the same guys that they always do. They're going to be looking really good, even with like Lance Rogers filling in that role. And I still see Team LVC as on top of this division. Does it, make opportunities for Bounce and Force to capitalize? I mean, yeah, of course. I mean, just like we saw with Valor and Dimes, you got to play the match, right? But
Gotta play the match.
Team LVC has just consistently dominated this division. They technically dominated it last year without Blake for this event in particular. So I think that Bounce will play them competitively. I think Force will play them competitively, but they still got to get over those barriers of having them, that stigma of just being dominated for the past season.
That's true. And so Team LVC in this very event last year went 4-0, I think almost perfect 11 points, and practically won the division one event in. They were that good that weekend, and the other 2 teams just couldn't get over the hump and beat them at all. And they get Joby Ramos back at this event, the reigning MVP of the league at the setter position, who I'm so excited to watch play again. And it's still going to be an uphill battle for Boston and the Northeast Force to take LVC out of their spot atop this division. But again, you got to play the matches. Anything is possible. And if those 2 other teams learned anything from the last couple of years, that they've got to play some seriously good volleyball and bring some serious talent to their rosters to have a chance against Team LVC. So let me look at the Boston Bounce roster for this weekend, because their thing always is depth. They just bring a million bodies. They have a ton of great talent in Massachusetts that they bring into the gym. But the question kind of for me is always, who's their starting 7? And from what I've heard, talking to both Jeff Foster of the Boston Bounce and Garrett Minyard of the Northeast Force, is that we might have a VLA first event. We might have a little bit of a trade action going on here. If I'm not mistaken, the Boston Bounce and the Northeast Force have exchanged players. If you remember a character, Brad Borsay, who was probably the Northeast Force best outside hitter last year, but played for Boston Bounce the year before in 2021 when they came into the league. Brad Borsay is back on the Boston Bounce roster. But in exchange, Frank Field, who's a very good, like, both pin, he played a little opposite of this event last year for the Boston Bounce. Frank Field has moved over to the Northeast Force. I think there's sort of a trade happening in that there, and I think we might be able to call that the first like semi-official trade in VLA history.
Yeah, alternate. I'll have to look on the rule book on that. Here I am searching our database. No, but no, I mean, you're going to see players kind of going between teams and things like that. You're going to see it more and more, especially with Tier 1. I mean, the guys definitely have the quality, the talent to play on different teams. It's not like it's unheard of. I mean, obviously, you got Madison Hayden, who, I mean, lives in Southern California. Makes more sense for him to be on Rising Tide than it does for him to be on Dimes or formerly Sport Connects. But I mean, so that would be one right there. As far as a straight, this guy for this guy, I don't know if they planned it that way. Maybe they're just both like, hey, he's coming here, you want to come over here, type of thing. It's not as official as a trade, but definitely something to point out is that there is player movement in the VLA. Players do jump teams. They go to what fits best for them, and the team reps also are looking for the best opportunities to be successful themselves. I know Northeast Force needs to have answers for some of the problems that they've had, and they definitely need to try to field a better roster to compete in this East Division. Balance, on the other hand, who I feel like they kind of view themselves as a top 4 team. They were last year, to potentially make a run at a championship. They definitely have to make moves as well. So I think really only LVC can kind of sit back on their perch and watch the other two kind of figure out their rosters. But they kind of have that luxury at the moment. Bounce and Force have consistently kind of beat up on each other, while LVC just kind of watches and then wins their matches. Really what Bounce and Force need to do is be able to take down LVC to really equalize this division. Otherwise, it's going to be LVC dominating for years to come.
And that's actually kind of exactly what we're going to see with this weekend's schedule, funny enough. Bounce versus Force play on Friday night. And I think that they're both, to a degree, are going to be figuring themselves out a little bit, which Team LVC is just going to be sitting back, watching, taking in a little bit of data and preparing to get their season underway on Saturday. So I am fascinated to see that. I'm looking at some of the rosters for this weekend. For Boston, a lot of the same usual characters, hugely deep at outside hitter. They've got Greg Woods, the only true opposite on the roster, but they could easily take a couple of their outside characters, put them on the right, and still be perfectly fine. Colin Ritter at the setter position, who's outstanding, but they're missing some of their usual middle blockers. Neil Ferraro is overseas right now. That is a big miss until he comes back. No Skylar Kaufman, no Stephen Moy, not even Francis Kokoros in the middle for Boston. Those are most of the guys that played meaningful minutes in that spot last year. So I'm curious to see how that goes. And for the Northeast Force, they rolled into this event last year, their first in VLA history, with 9, maybe 10 guys, and learned pretty quickly that that was not enough. And they've already done a better job of that this year with just what I'm seeing on paper. They bring in Deshaun Graham in the middle, who's played a lot of VLA before, went to the finals championship match for Rising Tide, I think 2 years ago. They bring in Frank Field, like I mentioned. They bring in a whole lot of new characters that I don't even really recognize. I don't know all their names, but I'm looking forward to getting to know all of them and understanding their games as quickly as I can once I get to Connecticut on Friday.
Yeah, no, and it's exciting that Force is kind of figuring that thing out. There is a huge learning curve, like we consistently mention,
Huge.
On how to approach any event, not just a VLA Cup or anything like that, but even just these events where And I think Garrett Minyard and some of those guys definitely looked at it like, oh, I'm just going to carry this team, and then realized, man, I'm exhausted, and they're getting ready to start, the second day. It's a higher level volleyball. You're not playing just a nationals where you can walk through a team here and there. I mean, you have to give 120%, or else you're not going to be in the 20s against LVC, and you have to do that, for 2 days. So,
3 days in this case.
yeah, 3 days in this case, but yeah. So I mean, it's just one of those things where I think that some teams, especially like Garrett, Tim Faulkner, Lloyd Ball, all of us were in that position at one time where we were like, oh, we'll just carry the team, we can do it. Then it came to, okay, well, maybe I need some help. I think that they're kind of figuring that out, where it's the depth part of it is such a huge factor, playing 4 matches in a weekend. And I'm happy to see that Force is kind of figuring that out. Bounce has figured it out. They just need to figure out other parts of their roster. And then obviously LVC knows what they're doing.
Yeah, they certainly do. So that's a pretty good preview there for the East Division kicking off on Friday night live from Connecticut. So cool little primetime slot for the VLA. We don't always get that. So looking forward to that. I will be there on the ground at the Mohegan Sun Casino. Shout outs to the New England region of AAU volleyball for hosting us or giving us a court at this juniors event. Very similar to last year. We had great crowds. It was a great turnout and put VLA volleyball in front of a lot of new people, both young players, parents, friends, whatever. Great event last year. I'm looking forward to being there. So that's what you can expect for the East Division. 3 teams, 6 matches, pretty familiar format. And check out the website for any more details. All that streamed live here on YouTube, of course. So Vince, that about it. I know we're a little short on time. I think we did what we could this week, and we're looking forward to the second week of 5 in a row, 5 weekends in a row of VLA volleyball, and we're only a little bit of the way through.
Yeah, I think that we do a good job of summing up a week worth of VLA discussion in a short amount of time when it's not months on in between each around the VLA episode. So yeah, easy for us to sum up the West Division Cup and obviously the first East event. Really excited to see what those teams have to offer. It's always a great event out there. I know the guys are super excited about it, but it's good to have us just rolling along. This month has just been already the start of something special, and we're excited where we're going right now.
Yep, no slowing down for the VLA. We had awesome success in San Diego last weekend. Now we're going coast to coast from San Diego to Connecticut. We'll see you all live from the Mohegan Sun Casino on Friday night. East Division kicks off the season, and then we'll be back in the middle of next week sometime. Stay tuned for that, for Around the VLA, to react to that event and preview the Phoenix event coming up the weekend after that. So a lot of volleyball going on. We will see you Friday night, and if not, we'll see you next week in Around the VLA. Thanks for watching.